This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is Jimi Mitchell. Jimi is a heavy metal guitarist, composer from Huntington, West Virginia. It's a pleasure to have you on, Jimi.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. You know, you and I met at NAMM this year. And
yes, we did.
Yeah, this is so amazing, NAMM. You know, this was my first year. And, you know, I wasn't that familiar with it. And I knew certain aisles that I wanted to go to, you know, certain booths. Mm-hmm. Steve Rosen, a good friend of mine who wrote Tone Chaser, he had a booth and he was sharing it with Casey Trash. And so I was looking for certain locations. And then I banged into you. I think quite literally, we banged into each other. And I grabbed your arm. I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And then we got to talking and you're like, yeah, you know, I was like, oh, you have to do my radio show. So thank you again. And I also had the extra pleasure of seeing you like probably 30 minutes later. I had walked a couple of aisles over and I heard this guy playing guitar and a lot of people were standing around. I'm like, who's playing now? You know, like your head's on a swivel. And it was you. And I was like, oh my God, I just talked to him. I was like, I just talked to him. So that's cool. So yes, you'll have to walk me through your career. You know, the last 20 plus years, you've been very active and you've been doing a lot. So I want to hear all about it. So you can bring me back to when you literally picked up a guitar, at whatever age that was.
Okay. Well, for me, the first time I picked up guitar and actually was able to do something was when I was a little kid. I was fortunate to have been raised in a family where all the music that was played was heavy metal, hard rock, classical, or blues. So I was always hearing everything that was coming out as, you know, the timeline was going from, you know, the late 70s on. When I was around 8 in the 3rd grade, I became obsessed with Van Halen, and I became obsessed with Eddie Van Halen in particular. I had an uncle who played guitar in a local band. And one day when I was at my grandmother's, he was there and he goes, hey, Jimi, would you like to learn how Eddie Van Halen does Eruption? I'm like, yeah, how does he do that? I said, do you know how to do that? And he goes, well, I can show you how he does it. I'm like, okay. He goes, it's called finger tapping. And he takes this little guitar, it's a little toy guitar about that big, and he hands it to me and he goes, now, what you're going to do is, you know, you put your fingers here and you take your finger and do this. And he showed me how to finger tap. So I knew how to finger tap 7 or 8 years before I actually started to play the guitar. I could pick a guitar up and just go blah, 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 you know, all over a neck. You know, I didn't know any kind of theory or I had no melodic sense or anything. I was just, you know, hey, I can do this. You know, I started out as a bass player because I wanted to be like Steve Harris from Iron Maiden. So I did a lot of that, you know, with the hand. Within a year of playing the bass, I realized I wanted to write my own songs. And the only way I could do that was to learn the guitar. Luckily, my mom had a Silvertone acoustic guitar, which was an old Sears guitar. I asked her if I could get it out and play it. And she said, yeah. And so I had to learn how to tune the thing. I had to think, okay, so the first 4 strings are the higher octave of what's on the bass. I had to, you know, just get used to the fact that there's a B string and a high E. And so I started out playing like melodic lines like the intro to Fade to Black by Metallica or Black Candles by Candlemass, you know, stuff like that. Started learning how to play rhythmically, you know, learned Merciful Fate tunes, Candlemass tunes, Obituary, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. By the time I was 17, I had pretty much just stuck with the guitar, you know, even though I still had a bass. And then when I was 18, I was hanging out with a buddy of mine named Andy Hott, who's the lead singer of a local group here called Zero King. We were talking about Yngwie Malmsteen. Do you remember K-Tel Records? Yes. They were this little record label that would put out all these compilation albums. Had this one called Metal Forces. And at the very end, there was the song I Am a Viking by Yngwie Malmsteen. I remember playing that for Andy. I'm like, this is amazing. Listen to that. You know, he's like, dude, I've got a home video of his where it's a concert from Japan. You got to see it. And I watched it with him. And that was instantly where I was like, okay, that's what I really, really want to do. I want to combine classical music and heavy metal. I ended up buying a BC Rich Warlock from a friend of mine, and it just went from there. And I spent the entire 90s era post-grunge learning all that kind of stuff. I was a diehard metal fan. And when everybody was like, why are you wasting your time doing that? Less is more and all that kind of stuff, was being told to me. And I'm like, I don't care. And then by the early 2000s, I'd had a band for a little while called Dark Fantasy, which I still have the name to this day. It was me and my brother and a guy named Jared Leach, and we did like a 6-song demo we'd done together over the course of the year 2000. A few years later, I joined a band called Profligate, which was a crust punk band. And I didn't know what crust punk was. I just thought it was grindcore. The guitar player in the band was like, hey, Jimmy, I really want you to play with me, man. You do that crazy, all those crazy guitar solos and our stuff. It would sound great. And so I did that for a while. When the band broke up, I was like, you know what? I'm going to become a solo artist. I want to write an instrumental record. And that was where everything began, pretty much from what I do now. And I spent the end of 2004 just writing a lot, released the album independently on my own. I remember going to a place that I don't think it exists anymore. It was called Big and Small Lots. Are you familiar with that store?
Sounds like one of those shopping warehouses. Is that correct?
Kind of like that, yeah. It was a place you went to, and it was like back stock and stuff that didn't sell in other stores, and they would just, you'd go and get all this stuff real cheap. Well, they had a whole aisle of like stereo equipment and CDs and stuff that you could buy. It was like you could buy like 500 blank CDs for $10, and you could buy all these trays of jewel cases, for almost nothing. So I bought a whole bunch of those things, and a friend of mine named Chris Luton, who was the former drummer of Profligate, he's like, hey man, you should totally like do a punk style cover. Take a picture of yourself, take your logo, place it on, go to Kinko's, and run off all those copies. And that's how I did it. Everything just kind of started from there. I started doing instrumental shows whenever I could, playing the backing tracks before they were called backing tracks. But I didn't ever hear anybody say, oh, do you have your backing tracks? I was like, no, I just showed up with an old Fostex that had my tracks on it and different tracks. And I would just, open track 1, then close it and open track 2 and have the songs already in there without the guitar solos and without the roots of the harmonies. I would just play it through a PA. Very, very DIY hillbilly, the poor man's way, and that's what I did. And I've been doing it ever since. Yeah.
Wow. So how are you burning your CDs?
I had the master. A friend of mine named Greg Gilbert ran all my stuff through Pro Tools. Since there was no bass guitar on, he goes, hey man, this needs a bit more thickness. We're going to do the Injustice for All effect on your stuff. So he EQ'd it in a way to where it sounded like there was bass in it. He gave me the hard copy, and I uploaded it to my mother's computer, and I would just burn CDs with that, put them in, the jewel case with the cover that I cut out with scissors and everything, and take them and sell them. And that's how I did it in the beginning. And I did the same thing for the second album too, The Intimidator, that I released a few years later. And then eventually I just went full on digital because I couldn't afford to do it the proper way. I actually didn't use Pro Tools or Reaper or Logic or any of those things for a while because I didn't have access to a home computer of my own at the time. So I just did everything the old way. I had a board that was digital, record everything into it, and then dump the stuff, when I could get to someone's house that had a computer that would let me do it. Around 2010 is when I finally got Reaper, on my own home computer, and I started slowly learning, how to do your own mixing and all that stuff. And to this day, I really don't use plugins. The only plugins I really use are for like reverb or delay or compression, but I don't use amp sims that, you would do like what they call a DI, which is where you literally go from your guitar into an interface and then you just record a dry track that's acoustic. And then you go in later and you find the amp that you want and have that sound. Instead, I've been using the same Zoom G21U since 2007, which has about 20 different amps stored into it. And I use the Mesa Boogie Dual Rectifier. And that's what I've been using ever since. Now at NAMM, I was using a new piece of equipment called like Nano Cortex, which I look forward to getting the Quad Cortex eventually. I've kind of always done heavy metal on like a poor man's budget, for lack of any other way to say it.
Well,
Yeah.
Jimmy, it's very inspiring, though, especially for our audience. There's a lot of young musicians all around the world that
Yeah.
everyone's life story is different. To hear you doing all of this when
Mhm.
technology 20, 25 years ago was really a
Mhm.
lot different than it is now is really very
Mhm.
impressive. Would you describe yourself to be someone who would be like what I call like an engineering mind or like a natural born handyman or mechanic? Because as you're talking, I'm already like, forget it. I would never be able to figure any of that out.
I suppose in some way, yeah. I mean, I was so determined. That was the thing. I remember when I did that very first instrumental album, I was really, really determined. I was like, I'm going to do this one way or another. I didn't have drum software. I didn't have all the big expensive tools that were available. I just used drum machine tracks that were literally on a Yamaha synthesizer keyboard. I created my own loops and then would reuse the same loops in certain songs. I would just find different patterns that I liked, and that's what I used in the beginning. And then I realized that the Zoom, like a year, in 2007 when I got it, there's a built-in drum machine in it. So I could find drum patterns. I started using those, you know, before I started using all the other stuff that people use nowadays. I was very determined. I wanted to prove a point. I wanted to show the world that I was a heavy metal guitarist who could shred, who could play. I wanted to get as far away from what was happening here. I live in kind of a weird area. There's always been local bands and local artists in this region, but it's also been a very trend conscious area in a lot of ways. Like when grunge happened, it stayed that way. I got really bored with the whole, as I call it, stoner doom stuff. I mean, some of it's all right, but there were so many different artists, doing that. And I was always more into European power metal, all the stuff that was happening over there. I was totally into guitar solos, high octave vocals, epic choruses, speedy parts. That's what I wanted to do. And nobody around here wanted to do it. They're like, dude, that's so 80s. And I'm like, so? you know?
Very
So,
funny. Yes, I totally get that. I wanted to ask you a question. When you start looking back now, 20 years later, and you look at
mhm.
your first album and then your second album and then, where you're at now, what do you think you could say to yourself where you saw the most growth in your work?
That's a good question. If I was going to go back and tell my younger self, one thing I would say is don't drink. that was a big one. Don't let excesses take you over. I did go through that there for a bit. I've been sober from alcohol for over 4 years, and
Congratulations.
without rehab. I'm proud to say that without rehab, I did not go to a rehab clinic. I did it all on my own. On the musical side of things, if I was to go back and tell my younger self something, I would say play to a click. Don't be afraid of the click track. Don't be afraid of the metronome. Because I listened to some of my older stuff and like I wasn't playing to a click. I was just playing to the beat. Was all I was doing and just trying to stay in time. And that's what I did for years. Just try to stay in time. Because I was that guy who would get an album by a band I really liked and then start finding a certain song that I thought was awesome. And I would just plug in and make sure I had the right tuning. I'd be, oh, wait for that low E to hit. Oh, you're in E or you're in E flat. And a lot of the power metal was in E flat. So I was like, okay, tune the guitar to E flat, do that. I would just learn by ear. And that's how I'd done it for years. So yeah, if I was to go back and tell my younger self, don't be afraid to play to a metronome, be a little more patient, don't drink alcohol. you know?
All very important things. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not a guitarist, but I have many friends and I've listened to many stories, even from guests on the show. It's not an easy instrument. When someone says I play by ear, I always find it fascinating. Would you be able to read music if someone showed it to you, or you're just completely by ear?
Pretty much 99.9% by ear. Over time, I started to learn how to read certain types of notation. Okay, if you throw me a piece of music that's all 16th notes, I'm going to know those are 16th notes. The reason why is because I got turned on to a program called Power Tab Editor. A friend of mine over in England, a guy named Pete Hawthorne, he was in a band called Warpath for a little while. He's like, Jim, you totally need to check this out because this is a great way to put your ideas down without recording. And he said, you can do a lot more with it too. And I was like, really, what? He goes, dude, you can create anything. Okay, when you hear the riff in your head, How's it played? And then you start tabbing. But as you're putting the tabs in, the staff up above it puts the actual notation in automatically. So that was how I started learning the difference between whole, half, quarter, eighth, 16th, 32nd, and of course 64th. I don't know who plays 64th notes.
Wow,
Yeah.
this is really interesting. I want to move into some of your actual songs. And the
Sure.
first one I want to bring up is Hell's in His Eyes. Tell me about
Yeah.
that.
In 2022, when I officially said, that's it, I'm done, I'm going to get sober, it opened up a floodgate and I couldn't stop it. And all these songs just kept coming out of me. I was easily averaging around 3 or 4 ideas a week. I just kept coming up with whole songs that didn't have a real direction other than they're going to be something at some point, opening riff, verse riff, pre-chorus, chorus, guitar solo section, and so on. I was jamming one day, just plugged in the guitar, was warming up my hands, and the opening riff to Hell's in His Eyes came out of me. And I was like, that's so cool. It reminded me of just a lot of the early to mid 80s British metal and even some of the metal that was coming out of LA. It was originally called Kill or Be Killed. I ended up creating the whole thing, and then I was like, I need a singer. And lo and behold, my friend Ralph Sheepers from the band Primal Fear, he had messaged me. He's like, hey, Jim, he goes, I've got a student that I think you and him would really work well together. His name's Nick Seymour. I'm like, all right, send him my way. And, he showed me video clips that he had on his YouTube page. And I was like, wow, this dude's really, really good. He kind of reminds me of Eric Adams from Manowar in a way. It's like he's got a similar tone, but he can also do like the Sebastian Bach kind of thing too. And he can hit it really high, but he's got a really powerful mid-range, real strong, which was what I was looking for. Somebody could do that. I reached out to Nick, say, hey, man, I got this one song. I said, would you want to work on it with me? Because he's like, sure. He's like, so what do you got? And so I sent him that song, currently called Kill or Be Killed. I said, dude, you can keep that title or you can write about whatever you want, because I'm a very diplomatic guy when it comes to working with other musicians. I might have a whole idea, but if somebody can go, hey, man, instead of that verse riff being the verse riff, could you make it the chorus? I'm totally willing to do that. I like to see what somebody else would hear that can make it even better. Nick wrote the lyrics because he could hear words, because I had a vocal melody. I played the vocal melody on guitar in the demo I sent him, and I sent him one without it. So dude, I said, you can even deviate from the original melody if you want to add your own. And so where he's a biker, he's like, hey, man, how about a good old fantasy biker warlord anthem? I'm like, sure, man, let's do it. And I reached out to my buddy Phil Willis down in Florida, who plays all the bass guitar on all the stuff I've been doing. Say, hey, man, we're going to do this. He's like, cool, send it. So we put it together, and there you have it. And the good thing is that once the song was officially recorded completely and everybody's parts were in there, Ralph Sheepers had reached out to me and said, hey, dude, send me the song. I want to mix it. I want to mix with you. And I'm like, cool. So I had already made an instrumental mix, and I sent him an actual stem, a WAV file of the track with the drums and the guitars and the bass and everything and the keys. Then I sent him all the vocal lines separately. I remember he's like, you're going to love it. And no joke, within less than an hour, Ralph messages me back, and he's like, okay, I did everything I could. He goes, I think you're going to like what I've got here. Because if I would have had more stems, I would have done more. I was like, seriously? And he sent it back, and I was like, wow, this song sounds so awesome, because like he re-EQ'd the actual music track and made it more Primal Fear-ish than the way that they do their mixes. He took Nick's vocals and put the right amount of everything in there to where it gave everything a nice warm tone. And I mean, even at the end, after the guitar solo, there's a bit where Nick does this really high scream, and the scream goes on for so many seconds, and then you hear another scream that's even higher. And that was originally the harmony. Like originally, Nick just did a big belting 4-octave harmony where it was like all layered. I was like, good Lord, I can't imagine this, wow. So I like the fact that Ralph listened and went, this would sound good if we just move this over here. It's like it was timed just right where and then it's like, oh wow, this is nuts. So yeah, and then we did a video for it and put it online, and that's it. It's history.
That's so great. So we're going to play that now. Hell's in His Eyes. Yeah, so all of your music is so interesting. It's great. It's like amazing. Another
Thanks.
song I wanted to bring up was called A Letter to the Unknown. What is the story with that?
I had been in that creative mindset, just coming up with ideas. And originally, the opening riff, that bum bum ba it was originally in another idea, but it was played faster. I was having a conversation with my wife. I don't know what show we were watching, but there was a whole thing that came up of the one that got away. That clicked because I looked at my wife. I said, so when you were a teenager, I said, who was the one that got away? And she was telling me, and then I started talking about the one that got away from me. And I went, wait a minute. In my head, I started hearing everything you hear now. And I'm like, oh man, there's got to be a way to do that. So I pulled up my Power Tab editor and I tabbed out that line. And then I was like, what instrument would work best? Because it's got a synthesizer in it. And you can choose anything that you can think of, any kind of string instrument or piano or organ or whatever. It's all in there. So I took that riff and I had it play as a church pipe organ. I'm like, oh my God, this reminds me of Typo Negative. you know, the whole song ended up becoming a tribute to that particular genre, the whole goth, doom, stuff that was happening in the 90s, bands like Typo Negative, be the greatest example. And there's another band from Germany I like called Mono Incorporated who does a similar kind of thing. And so I thought, okay, this is a nice gothy thing. Let's do that. Put the tune together. And then when I came up with the lyrics, I actually thought to myself, okay, when I was 19 years old, there was a girl that I really, really had a thing for. We were good buds, but she lived one way and I lived another. It was one of those things that it was just never going to happen, which is where the line in the song, two lives in different places, surrounded by many faces, that came about because she was very popular socially. She was surrounded by a lot of people and they were the opposite. They weren't metalheads. And then here I was, this scrawny 19-year-old, long haired dude wearing Obituary and Slayer and Iron Maiden shirts, and skinny jeans and all that. And it didn't match. I thought to myself, well, what would have happened if I would have never moved on with my life from that point? If I would have just forever held on to her. And this is where the whole fantasy storyline kind of comes up. And I thought to myself, I remember how the weather was during the fall back then. It was like that really chilly kind of fall weather where it rains a lot and the leaves are falling and it's always gray. But in the evening, eventually the gray goes away and the sun goes down off in the distance. And I thought to myself, what if I held on to that for years and then wrote a letter to this lady to tell her how I really felt about her? And that was how the story came about, the basis of the song. And so I tried to make a point, let it have kind of that goth eroticism thing to it, I long for you. I lust for you. You are my guilty pleasure. Your body is a treasure. I'm writing the words and I'm laughing as I'm doing it. I'm going, yeah, that's good. That's good. Use that. Especially back then, I was working for WMUL and I was interviewing, just like what you're doing, interviewing musicians all the time. And I got to do a one-on-one personal interview with everybody in Typo Negative on their tour bus once. I remember it was the second day to the October Rust tour in '96. I'm sitting on the tour bus with all the guys in Typo, and they were really cool guys. I remember they were talking about the new record back then. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because when you listen to all the tunes on the October Rust record, there's a lot of stuff that's very much geared towards attracting females, you know? And so I kind of took a piece from that and put it into my own song, just as a total nod to them. And that's it. I tried the best I could to make it the strongest track that I could possibly do. Because I have made a point when I started writing all these different tunes, don't hold back. Don't just play power metal. Don't just play neoclassical. Allow every influence that's ever come into me to come out. So that's why that song varies so differently from the other. I just wanted to showcase all the influences I've had over the years because there's quite a few.
Wow.
So,
Well, this is so impressive. I now know the inside story to the song, and it has so much more meaning now to me. So we're going to listen to A Letter to the Unknown.
So after I released that song, it was probably 2 months, maybe 3 months after I'd released it and put the video up on YouTube, which was just an audio video with the artwork. I got a message on Facebook Messenger from this girl. She's like, I love your song so much that I made a video for it. I was like, really? That's cool. And she's like, do you care to take a look at it? She goes, I'm being totally respectful. If you don't like it, I will gladly remove it, but please let me know what you think of the fan video I've made. I checked it out and was like, I'm floored that somebody likes my stuff so much that they were compelled to make their own video using their own vision, which I thought was really cool because some of the things that happen in this video this girl made are things I'd thought about because I was originally going to do an actual video for it and I couldn't get stuff together to do it. So that's why it is what it is. It's just album artwork, lyrics, and the song, you know.
Wow. So what was the video like? Tell us what it looked like.
It's a very simple, thing that was probably done with a MacBook or something. A lot of photographs and then like little clips that I don't know if they're necessarily AI or what they are, but a man and a woman walking on the beach, and there's clips where there's a guy standing, he's on like a balcony of like a mansion or something, and he's overlooking this whole valley and stuff, and I'm like, wow, this is cool that this girl thought of this. And there were some similar things because the original idea I had for the video at one point was to have it to where there could have been actors that would have looked like myself when I was that young and the girl that I'd had a thing for back then. I would have loved to have gotten a couple people and had them walk around Marshall's campus right around that time, because when I was going to release it, it was the same season. It was fall. It would have been great to have gotten somebody to look like me. And of course, if I would have done that, I would have gotten my son, and I probably would have gotten the daughter of the girl that I had the thing for, because I'm actually still friends with the person to this day. But she doesn't know that's the song's about her.
Wow.
She really doesn't.
Maybe she'll know now.
Maybe.
We
I don't know.
shall
I didn't.
see.
I didn't ever want to cause trouble, by telling. I was just like, that's why I don't ever say the girl's name. I don't want to, make her uncomfortable or anything. It's like, hey, that was years ago. I just took the inspiration and made this. It's art.
Well, I wanted to mention something you had said earlier because a lot of the references, like speaking about classical guitar and
Mhm.
instrumental guitar, I'm friends with Rob Balducci. And
Oh,
Rob Balducci actually does similar style guitar. Last year, I saw him on stage with your friend, Joe Stump. And they both,
nice.
yeah, they both did their own sets, but it was
Mhm.
literally at the same event, in the same venue. The thing about that night that was so great was that the audience was literally guitar fans because
Mhm.
both of them are really known for the guitar playing, but also instrumental guitar. Like you don't
Mhm.
necessarily need to sing along to that kind of music.
Mhm.
So I was like, oh wow, and then it started hitting me and I'm like, wow, this is a big year for very unique guitarists because we also have Joe Satriani going on
Mhm.
tour with Steve Vai. So there's like a lot of stuff happening. So I want to hear about this next song, Master and the Apprentice, because I know you do
Oh yeah.
that song with Joe Stump. So tell me
Yes.
about how you met Joe, how you came together with that song, and what that song's all about for you.
Okay, so Master and Apprentice is an idea that I've had brewing in my head for a few years, actually. The Joe Stump story for me goes back to the 90s. First time I'd heard of him was through my friend Andy Hott. He's like, Joe Stump apparently was in Belladonna for a short while. When Joey Belladonna had left Anthrax, he had formed his own band, and apparently Joe was playing with him. So I remember Andy telling me about this guy and seeing an issue of Rip Magazine. Now, keep in mind, this was 1994. You went to the section where there were all the album reviews. I remember seeing this picture of this guy who was doing the classic Malmsteen Blackmore pose split thing. The one knee bent way down, the left leg stuck straight out, the Stratocaster and all that. At first I thought it was Ingve. And then I did a double take and went, no, that's not Ingve. Who is that? Andy goes, oh, dude, that's Joe Stump. So I'd found out about him, but then 2 years later, I finally got to hear him. He had released a record called Supersonic Shred Machine. I'd called up Munzie Rishi from Skateboard Marketing when I was in radio. I said, hey, Munzie, I said, do you still do stuff with Leviathan? He's like, yeah. I said, could you get me a copy of Joe Stump's new record that just released? He's like, yeah, no problem. I'll have it to you here in a couple of days. And I've still got it to this day. I've still got it. I was just floored with the way he played. It reminded me of Ingve, but it was more extreme. and it was more metal. That was the other thing too. His rhythm, his riffs were just, they were heavy, they were chunky, and you could bang your head to them. Like you could really bang your head to a Joe Stump song, as opposed to where Yngwie, not so much. Joe would do like these really fast harmonized runs and crazy arpeggios and pedal points, and I was just in awe of it. I wanted to learn how to do all that. Fast forward many years later, 2009, I did a song called The Three Wise Men, and it was a tribute to Yngwie Malmsteen, Ritchie Blackmore, and Joe Stump. And my buddy Matthew Mills, when I sent it to him, he's like, dude, you need to let Joe Stump hear this. He goes, do you know Joe? I said, no. He goes, dude, hang on, I'm introducing you. So he introduced us through the internet, and we exchanged numbers, and Joe called me and was like, Jimmy, I love this idea. This is cool. Thanks so much for doing it. It's like, I feel honored. And I'm like, dude, no problem. I said, I love your stuff, man. We've been in touch ever since. A year ago, when I finally decided I was going to do that idea, I had done the whole idea and I wrote it in the vein of the way Joe writes. So I called him and said, hey man, got this tune. It's a tribute to you. Would you like to be on it? I said, I think it'd be awesome if we did a back and forth guitar duet kind of thing. It's like, yeah, sure. He said, just send me the track. Let me know where to go. A couple of days later, he sends me all the files and tells me about everything he used on it. And I was like, dude, really? Wow, that's cool. So I did the mix, and then I had my friend Ryan do the mastering on it. And there it is. It's like I finally got to make it come to life. I envisioned that for about 4 or 5 years and finally said, you know what? I'm doing it. This is happening. Yeah, there it is. It's a great tune. It's fun. There's a thing in the middle I do with the harpsichord following me. It's just harpsichord and guitar and cello and then choirs and full strings. I remember when I did that, and my son heard it the other day, and he goes, Dad, you do that all the time. I said, now I don't have to do it anymore. It's in that song. I said, it's been around since you were a little kid. It was a pedal point exercise, was originally what it was. It's an F sharp, and then it climbs up to B minor. And it uses the same shape. It just changes key. I was like, man, this sounds like something Bach would do. When I tabbed it all out and had the harpsichord play back at me, I'm like, oh, I've got to do that. And Joe thought it was really cool. He's like, that's a cool break right there in the middle, before we both go back and forth, just ripping. A lot of fun. And I hope to play it out live with him at some point, because we have talked about it. I said, dude, whenever we play live together, we have to do this together on stage. It'll be awesome. And Joe's a great dude, man. I feel very honored that not only him, but all the people I've worked with over the years. I've worked with Matthew Mills, Joe, Mike Kerr, Jean-Pierre Abad, Ralph Sheepers, Nick Seymour, Sebastian Lehman, Jan Eckert, Pete Selk, all these people that are in power metal bands that I've listened to for years, that I'm friends with. I'm just like, this is awesome. I'm so glad I get to do this. It's great. And I can't wait to see what the future brings, because there are so many ideas I have that I'm going to be putting out later in the year. I never know where anything's going to take me. I never do. I just put it out there and do the best I can to get it out as far as possible, which is hard to do, especially in this day and age. I mean, there's so many great guitar players and composers who are putting stuff out that's like mega high quality. And I get it that like right now, the big thing is, the use of like the 7 or the 8 string guitar, just doing really technical, crazy, almost proggy kind of stuff. I stick with more of the traditional metal, power metal, thrashy kind of stuff. And that's just what I do. We'll see what happens.
Wow. Well, this has been great. It has been a pleasure to hear all about you, learn all about you, know in particular how creative you have been since the beginning. I want you to plug your social media and let the audience know how they can get in touch with you and how they can get in touch with your music.
Okay. I'm available on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I have a Twitter account, but nobody would really know it. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on YouTube. You can find, actually, let me pull up
So what are they actually called? Is it Jimmy Mitchell?
Instagram.com/Jimmy Mitchell official / that's pretty much it. And then Facebook.com/Jimmy Mitchell metal, all one word, Jimmy Mitchell metal. / YouTube.com @Jimmy Mitchell. There you go.
Just so the audience knows, Jimmy's name is spelled Jimi,
Yeah.
Mitchell.
Yeah, my parents named me after Jimi Hendrix, which is why I have the Jimi.
Very cool.
Ironic that I would be named after one of the most iconic guitar heroes of all time, and I would end up playing guitar, and I would end up not only playing guitar but playing Fender Strats, which is what Jimmy played. you know,
Wow.
so,
Wow. Well, it has been a pleasure to have you on. Again, this has been Jimmy Mitchell, and I look forward to seeing all of your stuff in the near future. Thank you again, Jimmy.
thank you so much, my friend.
Thank
It's been
you.
awesome.
You have been listening to Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium, Dream Central Station, LLC. My audio editor is Al Hemberger at the Loft Recording Studios in Bronxville, New York. This is WNEW 102.7 FM radio.